It's going to be wonderful being with you the next hour. With me in the studio is Ronda LaRue. Rhonda is up from California specifically to be with us today, and I really appreciate you coming, Rhonda.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
The first time we met, we did it on the telephone for your first book, Remembering Who You Really Are. And you now have a new ebook out, which we'll be talking about. I have it in, I guess people could, even though it's an ebook, you're able to print it out as well.
That's right.
I haven't gotten that many ebooks. This is called The Art of Living Your Destiny. So I asked Rhonda that one of the things that she really is a master at is to help those of us who want to break out of our ego and touch that unique essence that's within us, our own wisdom, our own inner knowing. And she agreed with me to share some of her powerful techniques with us. So welcome again, and why don't we begin by, you bring to this work, Rhonda, such a background of yourself, developing yourself, and just allowing yourself to get into the space that you can do work like this. How did you discover that you had that healing energy within you?
That's a really good question. It wasn't so much that I studied it as I went through my own inner struggles, seeking deeply, you know, and through my own process of really looking, really trying to, you know, I've always believed and known that the truth does lie within. So I've spent my life really dedicated to listening for that truth, for looking for that truth, and for coming to meet it. So really what I've discovered is that we all have that, and it has more to do with letting go to it, letting go into it, than it does with accumulating books and studies, and those are all just things to help you kind of remember what you already know, which is why the title for my book came up, Remembering.
Well, because you are an artist.
I think everybody's an artist, ultimately. But yeah, what is an art? When you're really alive to your soul, to yourself, yes. To be more pragmatic about it, which I think is the level you're asking of me right now. I grew up doing art. My mother was an artist, and we always had, you know, clay and things, you know, provided very, very young. I remember the very first piece I made was out of clay, were little blobs of snow, because I was just in love with the snow that particular day. So I made, you know, snowdrifts and things, because I was probably 2, you know. So they were really snowdrifts to me. They were just blobs of clay, really, but.
Well, because one of the things that excited me, and through the interview, we're going to be coming up on the screen with some of your artwork and some of the artwork of the people that come and work with you. And I would like all of you to know that one of the things that's unique about Rhonda, actually, I don't know of anybody else who does this, but she does something called customized individual work with us. In other words, you go and you live with her for sometimes some programs are 3.5 days, some are longer, or?
Mostly 3.5 days, but it doesn't feel like 3.5 days. I don't know if this is a compliment or not, but most people say, I feel like I've been here for 3 weeks. I can't believe this has been 3 days.
So it's really intensive.
It's very intensive, but it's very rejuvenating too. It's a funny paradox. It's both. You know, it's timeless, so the day seems very long because so much happens, and yet it's exquisitely healing and rejuvenating too.
and Rhonda, I know a lot of your work was making masks, because even on the front of your ebook, there's making of the mask. And what excited me when I started reading your work, of course I had that first experience with you, but there is something about an artist that, I use the word intrigue, it's much deeper than intrigue, but when you're working with art, in my understanding anyway, to really make a piece of art that would express something, you're dealing with an energy, you're dealing with a deep energy. And so it excited me to see how you would take yourself being an artist and then bring that into spiritual development, personal development. Does that make sense?
It does, and I guess if I'm following along with where you're heading with it, I also feel like that's what this retreat work is about with people. It's really just learning. We're all artists. I think we're all meant to be artists of our life. The ingredients of our life, the divorce, the bad things, the good things, are all the ingredients to which we're called to make a masterpiece. And everyone is a potential masterpiece in the making. So it's all art.
You do say that whatever the conditions of your life, if it's an illness, and you've had some pretty miracles, which we'll talk about, with people coming to you and actually being healed. If it's illness, if it's relationship problems, if it's money problems, that within those conditions is something. Well, let me have you put it, because you're the one that I loved how you said it. How would you say that?
Well, I really have come to see and to know that within our struggles, within our wounds, lie our gift. It's the buried treasure is under there, and the way to find, people are out looking for happiness, looking for peace, looking for, all these things, when really it's right underneath that which is painful, that which has been our struggle, and underneath everything. Look at your own life. Anything that's been one of your most painful moments, hasn't that been underneath it a moment of amazing, that striving, searching, longing, aching for something more? There's your soul right there. So underneath whatever is the struggle is the gift to be claimed. But it takes really going to meet it, having the guts, the courage to stand in the presence of your own suffering or your own pain, to find that underneath the ache is the longing. I often will say to people, in the first day or the first couple hours of the retreat, if you look at a place where you've been very, very sad, or where you feel a longing, or you feel a heartbreak, just attend for a moment to what that feels like in your body. And if you do, what do you notice? In your body, it isn't just suffering. That suffering has inherent in it this amazing feeling of connection. Can you just see, like, in that moment of longing, of aching, there's actually a connection. You're actually connected, which is why we filter it as longing. We filter it as lack. But if you get right to the heart of it, there's something else there, which is you're longing because you're already sensing spirit, you're sensing soul, you're sensing, there is something more. Yes,
and I could, what I'm experiencing as you're talking, Rhonda, that in our culture, or even in our backgrounds, or what we read about or watch television, there's so many myths and there's so many misunderstandings of what it means when you are grappling with something painful. Because I know in my own life, I can think back of how I was in my 20s and my 30s. And one of the things that's fun for me is for me now to apply what I now know to how I was back then. And I see that that's helpful for me. But back then, boy, I went through a lot of pain, and maybe that's why I do the work that I do, because I love showing people that they don't have to suffer. The suffering, that there's different kinds of suffering. Let me put it like that.
Yeah, well, the worst kind of suffering is the kind of suffering where you don't engage it and you stay rather dead and fighting against it. But the kind of suffering where you go right, a really beautiful story, if I can segue into it, is, because it came to my mind as you were talking, is this one woman who came to me who was suicidal her whole life. Really, really struggling against, and really thinking she was going to, nix it, end it all. And she looked, I had her kind of travel into her body, which is just, I just use that as a way to get past the mind, because when the mind's fighting, all the mind can do is fight. It can't do anything but that, solve it, get away from it, get away from I need to grow away from my suicidalness. She was never going to get it that way. So we went right straight into her body, and I said, what does it feel like? Where do you feel it? And at the base of her gut, and in her lower abdomen, she said, I see this little crouched up figure, just cowering over, just wants helpless, hopeless, despairing, wants to give up. So rather than to keep trying to fight it, surmount it, get above it, put it away, I said, go sculpt it. So she sculpted it out of clay, and she made this little crouching figure out of clay in a couple of hours, and spent the rest of that evening, lit candles around it, and talked with that part of herself that had been so despairing, so ready to give up life, really. And she brought it outside of herself, looked at it, and talked at it. That's a different kind of suffering. It's a kind of suffering that heals, that cleanses, because you're right there with it. There's aliveness in that. And that's what you're talking about. The other kind, where you're just trying to rally against it, is the worst kind of suffering, because there's no transformational potential. There's no aliveness into it. She gave it great. She breathed fire into it. She breathed life into it, and it transformed her. She's no longer suicidal at all.
That's great.
In fact, she ended up doing a fire ceremony on the third night, thanking that part of her life, because she recognized that the part that had been suicidal all these years had protected and cherished an important part of herself that wasn't ready, and it was undeveloped, and it protected a certain innocence that now she was able to allow to have in her life. So it brought back her playfulness and her innocence. So she truly thanked it and meant it.
Yeah, that's one of the things that you are, a technique that you use a lot is asking ourselves a deep question, and it goes along, I think, with what you were just saying, that what you suggest is one of the questions that you say to ask ourselves is, what really matters to you in your life? Mm-hmm. And you say, don't answer that question with your head, but answer it with your gut. Mm-hmm. And why don't you talk about that a little? I thought that was interesting.
Well, again, it's really any question to bring one to that place, like when you're looking at a sunset and you're just in awe. You know, is to bring your answer, your quest and your listening to that level, because that's where our soul resides. So I'm just posing a question that takes you, you know, and suggesting that you go so deeply into it until you find that place where you're in awe, you know. So yeah, if you were going to die tomorrow, what most matters to you? And if you keep asking that question, because otherwise, you know, well, it most matters that I pay my bills. It most matters that, you know, but if you keep asking that question until you find, you know, the very, very seated, most kernel, what is it? And that's a great worthy quest, because it requires, to really answer that, it requires that you drop down into, you know, everything starts to peel away. Well, no, I guess it isn't that I pay my mortgage. That's not the most important thing to me before I die. You know, so it pulls you into finally coming to that place where the soul can speak.
Precisely. Well, I know the way you put it in your ebook, anyways, you helped me to really go deep. I mean, I like, Rhonda, how you teach that you've got to ask this question and answer it within yourself, beyond your mind. And I think just by you saying that there's a place to go beyond your mind, you guide us to realize that there is a potential beyond the mind.
Well, that's where all the suffering starts, is that people are suffering over the mind wanting to stay in control of everything, and this ache for something deeper. So they're in a contradiction within themselves. And the reason I say to ask those kinds of questions is to get clear on your contradictions. So you know, oh, the mind is always going to want to, you know, have comfort, security, safety, you know, physical things, comforts. And the soul's always going to long for awe and inspiration and wholeness and integration.
Well, what did you answer when you said that, when you asked that question?
You know, there's so many different words, and words are very difficult, you know, as the people in the non-dualist world talk about. But for me, if I could give it many different words, I most long to know truth to the extent truth can be known. And I don't mean known intellectually known, I mean to be truth. And truth is huge and vast and part of the mystery. So it means, that word means something different to me than I could probably translate in the context of this.
But you have a real burning
it's
desire to know.
Yeah, I don't want illusions. I don't. You know, if in the Matrix, what is it? The pill. You know, the film, The Matrix, and you're offered the pill of illusion, but you get to be comfortable and safe. And you know, the man holds out the pill. Do you want the pill of comfort and safety, or do you want the pill to know what's really happening here? And I'd have to pick the pill of what is truth. I don't want the superficial. I don't want something that just makes me feel good, that isn't of the depth of this amazing mystery.
Precisely. One of the things I'm going to come up on the screen with is in your home in Ojai. It's a beautiful, from the pictures, it looks like it's, I can see them when somebody goes there, that just the environment, there's a spirit about the place. But you really emphasize having good food. And what's the purpose to that?
I guess I must be part Sufi. I love the idea of everything. You know, I have an irreverent reverence, which I think is part of wholeness. So there should be dancing, and there should be food, and there should be everything's sacred. So yeah.
Did you? I mean, this might sound trivial, but I mean, are you a chef? Because I thought some of the, I mean, the audience can see. You can see by the pictures that I'm showing you. I mean, they're very pretty, and they look delicious.
Everything's art. I love preparing great meals. It's an art form. Everything's an art form. It's sort of like the Buddhists, you know, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, it's just make your life an artwork. And so when people come, we live art. Everything is art. And so what really happens is not the talking, and it's not the techniques, and it's not the, you know, the little processes. It's really that for 3.5 days a person comes into, they step through a portal where they're in touch with their deepest essence, and they directly experience, live, breathe, and sleep for 3.5 days their own artistry. Everything is art. So the food is art making, and it's all love making. It's art making, love making, same thing.
Well, Rhonda, what would you say though when you say everything is art? Because I'm thinking now of my house, and I'm thinking of, do I really go into my life that everything is art? How would you describe that everything is art?
I would describe that to mean that everything that is given, everything that you give conscious presence to. So if you're consciously present for what you're doing, really, really there with it, you're not thinking about, you know, answering the phone or talking to somebody on the phone while you're preparing a meal. You're really there, preparing it, looking at it, feeling it, smelling it, paying attention to it. Then that is art. It's everything's holy ground when you're conscious, when you stay completely present. And so it's relationship, engaged. Everything's engaged. So in the house, when I set something on a table, I set it on a table not just because, oh, I'm tired of it and putting it down now. I pay attention to where I put it down, why I put it down, why it sits in that place, and it moves when it's time. When there's a reason for it to move. It's all conscious.
So how would you say? Because I know for myself, I know I'm not alone, but you know, when you go into an activity, you want to make sure you're not you have this idea of how it should look. So whenever we say something is artistic, then anyway, in my mind, what I'm struggling against is would this be judged artistic? And I know what you would say is that really is something that we each have to have that evaluation within ourselves, and it's not something imposed upon us.
Right, that, and it's also not something that the critic mind really gets to define as art, but one in which, if you are in relationship with it, that defines whether it's art.
I love it.
It's alive. It has to be alive, engaged in relationship. You know.
That's great. So it would be anyone. Then when I love that. And this is the essence of your work.
Yeah,
that
pretty much.
You talk about what relationship are we to life.
Yeah.
Or to whatever we're doing.
Yeah, so exactly. So in those 3 days, a person stays so in relationship to everything that it literally, it's like saturating, that's what it is to be alive. That's what it is to be present. Instead of trying to practice the power of now, practice meditation, practice, you know, you can't practice it as a technique. You have to live the experience of it, let your cells know it, let your heart know it, and then it just is.
So I can see for myself, I know what's happening to me now after all these years. I've finally given up using alcohol as a way of coming into the present moment. And it occurred to me, because it really is new for me to be out in the world without alcohol, it occurred to me that when I started drinking, and this is way back in my teen years, how that really robs a person, robbed me, of really knowing what it means to be alive. I don't know, I mean, did you ever take any substance?
Yeah, I could be your story. I did too. I mean, many years, alcohol was my form of diving, feeling into spirit. It was a cheap, easy way to come closer.
Exactly.
And I have a lot of compassion for it because it also is a way, and there are there were some things that were, I mean, in some ways I'm grateful. And in some ways, it was my greatest teacher and my most difficult, struggle. We all have our places. People are addicted to the television. They're addicted to the cell phones. I don't count one worse than the other.
Right.
But to take it and to suffer with it and to also have gratitude for it and to recognize what it has offered you, both positive and negatively, is a sign of great maturity and wisdom, and to let it shift as it shifts.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, I want to bring this up because it's something that I think is just so adorable. I rescued a little cat last weekend, and I have cats. Actually, I used to think of myself as a dog person, and now I have some cats as pets, and I love these little animals. And I just thought this morning, how interesting. There's a phrase in the Course in Miracles that says a most beautiful act is when something that you hated becomes something that you love. And it's not that I hated cats, but I was totally indifferent to cats. I mean, my family, we always had dogs, and we just ignored cats. And it's just very interesting for me now to have this relationship with cats. And this little being that I brought into my house, it's been a week now, she's only 5 months old, and I am amazed at how she has just made herself at home in this strange house. I mean, of course, hopefully the house, there's peace in the house, but regardless, this is strange to her, and yet it's like she's lived there her whole life. And when I look at her, I think, I bet you there's something within me that as I connect more deeply to my own inner essence, that I would be as comfortable and as free in life as this little cat is.
Well, don't you notice that? Don't you notice that within yourself as you say that? That's in fact the case?
Well, yeah, but I still have a lot of struggles. I mean, I hear it. But yes.
Well, yeah, but you can hear it, and you can find the places where you do feel that way. I don't mean the places like physical places, like I'm comfortable here and I'm not comfortable there. I mean interior places. You can hear the part of you that when it's open, it just naturally feels at home anywhere.
That's true.
It's an interior thing.
Yeah. And I'd have to say that I was saying to you at the beginning of this interview that I'm very grateful that I have devoted my life to being in touch with my inner knowingness, my inner wisdom, my inner love, because it really feels great to have that. And so all of you out there, if you're giving up or you're thinking, oh my God, it's taking so long, please don't give up, right? It's worth.
No, what is
it? Doesn't have to take a long time, but if it does,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter.
So what would you say when people come to you, Rhonda? What would you say that you find out? What is it about us that keeps us from knowing ourselves?
The mind. The mind that has to know. I'm not trying to sound enigmatic, but it's really the mind. The part the part in us that struggles has to know it, has to get it, which is the mind, can never know this.
Right.
It's impossible, and we don't get that. We can't get that, and we fight against that, and we think, well, then if there's another way of knowing, I have to know what that is. Well, it's still the mind trying to get it.
Because we think there's something to get.
It's a funny paradox, but I mean, you really have to slip into that. Oh, that's why I use the language of art. You really have to slip into that open, listening, empty place, and then it's known through you, but the mind never gets to own it. And so that's a giving up that it takes quite a bit of angst for some people. It took angst for me. I have very strong intellect, and I fought with that intellect side most of my life. It took a long time to really have it sink in, that for some part of my being to finally rise enough to the surface and to recognize the mind is not the instrument. It's the wrong tool. It's the wrong method. It can't. I totally get that. the Eastern philosophy people, the Maharishi, and those people talk about that all the time. And to us in the West, it sounds like a bunch of gibberish, but it really is so. Mm-hmm. The ego mind can't know it.
Right. Well, I know that, let's come up on the screen with some of the artwork that, I know people go to your website, they could see some of the artwork that some of your clients have done. Can you why don't you give us an example, and we can come up on the screen with some of the artwork that people have done working with you.
Oh, that'd be great. And actually, it's funny to talk about, because the artwork, they are the artwork, really, they are. So in some cases, we can show some of the images of people when they prepare for a ceremony, which is sort of sanctifying themselves. So they do become the art. In some cases, it's doing a sweat ceremony. And so we can see a picture of a person getting the cold plunge ready because they're going to do a sweat, like the old traditional Native Americans, only I use a sauna that was given to me by a Shumash elder who was too old for the lodge. And so I call it the civilized sweat. So, they'll do a sweat ceremony, and they may spend all day having done a lot of inner work beforehand, preparing this as their altar. So their altar is getting ready for going into a sweat and coming out and going into the cold plunge. And so there'll be flowers and sheer claws and things like that. That's an art form.
What is the cold plunge?
Well, after you sweat, you go into the freezing cold plunge, and then you go back into the sweat. So it's a total body cleanse, hot and cold. Several rounds. Also, we can show some pictures of the altars that people make, and they're really only, again, each one has a specific meaning for that person. And so, to show it as an image, they're beautiful images. They're beautiful to show the images. They're very kind of mysterious, and they hold the feeling of quite a sacred feeling. But truthfully, too, for that person and the images that we show on the screen, there's thought behind each one. There's a meaning behind each symbol. So that's the beauty of art, is everything that you find or meet within yourself, to give it a manifest form, to bring it out of your being and give it a manifest form. So like a goblet's placed there for a specific reason, and it means something. And I don't mean it as a technique. I mean that person did it. A good example is a woman who was there last week with me last week, and she made this figure that's like a warrior woman, because she was really feeling beat down, unable to stand in her own strength. She came saying, I want to find my strength. And the first thing she created was this powerful kind of goddess woman with a sword and a marble that turned out to be the orb of knowledge. And here was this beautiful being that now talked to her and told her how to access her own knowledge. All it was she took something from within herself, put it out, like the woman I told about earlier, and then dialogued. She was really dialoguing with herself. She thought she was dialoguing with who knows what, until she realized that's my own wisdom talking to me. So I use ceremony. I don't even like to use the word, because everything should be ceremony. Our whole life should be ceremony. Everything should be, consciously see something, be engaged, be in relationship with it, and honor that. Honor what you see with a physical act. Honor what you see with a physical act. Here we are, and the Word was made flesh, to use the biblical terms. We're given inspiration and seeing, and we are also physical beings. So we're called to manifest, to show it. And that's how transformation happens. That's why I don't use it as a strategy or a technique. It's because that's the way it happens. We see something and you give it form. If you see something, from reading that book, and then you take it and you offer something in your home because it stands for that, you've just taken an insight and given it physical form. It has to change your life, because you've now engaged it and brought it out into the world. You've now brought it forth. It's not just in here anymore. It's brought out into the world. If that makes sense to you.
Well, yeah. What's coming to mind is, you really are a teacher out there, a mentor, to bringing out our own uniqueness, our own individuality. And some of us could come from backgrounds that really squelched that individuality, or there was even superstition or fear around, or labeled it narcissism or something like that. No, what's in us is just so beautiful.
Yeah.
What's in us is the temple of God. We are God.
Right.
And as you really embody that, I hear you, Rhonda, just being, not just, you being out there, be in a place for people who want to express that and who want to realize that.
And you're right, exactly, because it doesn't even matter, like I said, we said before, it doesn't matter what the material is. Even the most difficult, I mean, I've had quite a lot of women, a startlingly number of women, and I think it's because it's so prevalent, come who have been, you know, abused. I mean, really seriously abused in their lives. And I mean, that's a terrible material to have to work with. But even if you take something as horrendous or as, you know, heinous as some of these kinds of things, when that is actually allowed, seen, not denied, not tried to be fought above, you know, right, risen above, or you know, somehow in psychotherapy, you know, but instead you meet it, it becomes your beauty. It becomes an expression of your holiness.
Let's say somebody comes to you being physically abused. How do you be more specific? How would you be with them?
Well, an example, I don't be anyway, except to allow them to shine a light on it directly, as opposed to try to heal it, fight against it, solve it. Instead, they go right straight into it. So I guess the best way to answer you is to give you an example. So in one example, a woman ended up making a collage. So she just allowed the things that because she realized in our first session that while she was abused when she was a baby, while she was abused as a little baby, now she's 50-some years old, she had been sort of redoing it to herself by not being able to, like, you know, her whole life. So for 50 years, she had been really the abuser in some ways because it was so still ingrained in her. And her sister actually at age 50 didn't know what else to do and committed suicide. So she had a double guilt because her sister, who was also abused, you know, took that way out, and she didn't know how to handle that. She ended up making collages. And, you know, she put the guy on there. I mean, the images are incredibly powerful. They're difficult to look at. No one would want to look, you know, I didn't want to look. No one wants to look at that, really. But she put it right there. She looked at it. She talked to it. She watched. And then that's how she discovered, as she was looking at it, you know, she had a picture of kind of a monstrous-looking guy, you know. And, I mean, it was very phallic, and it had a lot of symbols in it. And she was a corporate executive. It wasn't like she was, you know, everyone has access to that level of symbolic seeing when they just play. That's why art is such a great way, because anyone can look at symbols and start to dialogue. So she dialogued with the symbols in that, and that's when she recognized that all her life she had actually been perpetrating what he was no longer even doing, and it broke free for her because she honored it in a certain way. She honored her truth, what had been her suffering, her pain. She honored it and gave it a place. She looked at it, looked straight at it, and it shifted that for her. So now it becomes her something she has a gift with other people. And now she's got a foundation, and it's not like out there trying to save the world. It's a much more truthful, here's your wholeness, you know? Exactly. Here's your wholeness.
So, you know, I'm always trying to understand something. So let me run this by you and see what you say. So there's different techniques out there, right? And what I'm hearing you say, Rhonda, that when you deal with something symbolically, especially something dealing with art, what that allows us to do is, if we are with some pain, let's say, and we want to raise our vibration, I mean, that's a way to talk about it now, is to raise our vibration, is to let our emotions get to a softer place. Am I being clear if I say it that way?
I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, yeah.
The key, though, is what really would cause that shift? I mean, it's not enough to know something intellectually. No. We all look, you can think of, there's all methods out there, you know, NLP, what? I mean, what else is out there? Abraham Hicks, Gestalt therapy, Jungian therapy. Right. I mean, there's 100 things out there. But what is it that really allows the inner beingness to be able to, well, how would you say it? Is it a shift, or what is it? To let yourself see something differently.
Mm-hmm. What do you think it is?
Well, what I was hearing you say is that when you guide somebody to do using art form, using, you know, making a symbol, that in the creation of a symbol, you have to shift to create that symbol.
Yeah, that is a good way of saying it. Also, I guess what I would say is that of all those things out there, you know, you named off 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of them, and there's hundreds of techniques out there. The technique isn't the thing.
Exactly.
In any of the cases. It never ever will be. Anytime you go after it through the technique, and that's the way you're trying to resolve the problem, it can never be resolved. The only reason any quote-unquote technique works is because it's no longer a technique, but because it slips you into a different space. And really, as long as we're in the mind, it backs back to the mind, as long as the mind is trying to grasp it through a technique, it'll never, ever, ever happen. The reason what the work that I do with people I think is powerful is simply because anything that brings you into the more of the into the symbolic way, because that's closer to the language of soul. You know, we're so accustomed to our linear, mental, rational way of thinking that we've forgotten that there is even another language. We don't even think there is. We think there only is the getting it up here. Aha, I see it. And you're right. No amount of intellectual understanding will ever solve the problem or provide a transformation. It can't. It's incapable. It's the wrong tool. But anything that brings you into, like dreams. Dreams are symbolic, you know, drumming, anything that brings you into, you know, singing, art, anything that brings you into the imaginal realm, which we misunderstand as a word now. You know, we used to understand that word, but it's now become fake, made up. You know, we don't understand that word anymore, so I hesitate to use it. But anything that brings you into the language of symbol is it's a rounded language. It's a language that can mean many things at once. That's why dreams are so great, or art is so great, or meandering in nature is so great. You know, when you've had a moment of aha, you couldn't put a linear peg onto, well, I saw that sunset and then I watched it go down there and then that, you know, you can't go linear with it.
Well, you know, when I went on your website and I saw you have a slideshow, and this is we're going to become, we are coming up, all of you are seeing some of these pictures. I wanted to show my audience these pictures, Rhonda, because when I watched them, I was put in a transcendent state. And I bet you every one of those pictures that you chose, there was an energy behind them, but I just would like you to know, and I invite you to go to Rhonda's website and experience this for yourself, apart from what you see here. But there is, I love it when I have been, finally, after all these years, I have had to pull myself out of, you know, my rational mind. But I can see that what you create for people is an opportunity to get out of the mind.
And you know what amazes people is how easy it is, because you're right, most of us have spent our entire lives trying to figure out how to do that. And what is amazing is it's phenomenally simple. It's just not easy to do.
Well, you know, I want all of you to see something. For me, you know, like to prepare for my interview, right? Look, I went on both of I have another guest that I'm going to be interviewing. I've got all of these paperwork, right? So I'm beginning the interview and I'm thinking, okay, now what should I do? And what I finally did was I did this.
Right. Right.
Because I said, you know what? It's not in there, Rosemary.
Exactly.
It's in me being with you.
Exactly.
But I'll tell you, it has taken me a long journey to realize that it's here and not.
And look at that, because that's something you probably experience all the time in this role, which I think is phenomenal, because it takes a lot of courage to be able to just throw that thing down and actually go, okay, let's just be here. And let's just trust the flow of what comes. And you can probably feel the difference if you look back on this even right now, as opposed to had you had notes and little index cards, and
right.
You know,
right.
It would have been a whole different experience, and how much could really come out.
Right, and I think it has been. I know that the journey has been when you do something and you have the experience of it. I realize that it's not something, the knowledge is not something encased in something.
No.
What really matters is when it comes from a place of connection. It comes, like, I liked how you said it earlier, I'm present, I'm here, I'm with you, I'm not worrying about what's the right thing to ask you. I'm really here just wanting to, I'll say it like this. What would it be to be alive?
Exactly. Exactly. And to be alive, for us to be alive right here, right now, we have to be really listening and just let it flow where it flows. And that doesn't mean there's not intelligence behind it. There's incredible intelligence behind it. Way more intelligence than had we decided ahead of time what we were going to talk about. Because it's alive to what we are all saying we are here about, spirit. I mean, how can you be alive to spirit if you're not immersing yourself in it and falling into it and letting go enough to do it.
Rhonda, can we talk about that? I think the husband and wife came to you, and the husband was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer. Did his wife come with him?
Yes, she did.
Can you talk about that? Because I think my audience would like to experience what happened to that person.
Well, it was really a beautiful story. They had come once before, and she called a couple of weeks after the retreat, and said that he had just, because they were just getting ready to do some pretty profound movements based on what had happened from the first retreat, and she called and said, my husband's just been diagnosed with terminal 4 stage 4 terminal lung cancer from 2 prestigious university, medical schools. So it wasn't like it wasn't a misdiagnosis. They were darn sure, and they said, yeah, this is it. You're kind of on your way out. And so they called me saying that they were supposed to go right away immediately into chemo, and I was away on vacation. They said, we really don't want to go right into chemo. We feel like we need to come here and deal with our spirit first. We really feel that that's what is right to do. And, they were just regular, kind of normal working people. They weren't like, way off into New Age or anything like that at all. It was one of those crises. And when you hit a crisis, I think oftentimes you do ask that question, what most matters? And they said, I talked to the man on the phone, and he said, I really want to come here before I make the decision on what to do down the medical path, because it dawns on me now with this death sentence that I don't know what it is to live or love yet, and I want to find out what it is to live and love before I die, and I want to come and see if I can find my answer for that, and from there make my decisions about how much medical, whether to, et cetera, and all that.
I love that that he doesn't know what it means to, how'd you say that? He doesn't know what it means to live, or?
Yeah, he said, I'm coming because I want to discover what it is to live and love before I die.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And really and truly, isn't that what we all want to discover before, so I had that on the head of my website for a while as quote, because we all want to know what it is that's what we're all aching for. That's where all the pain and the suffering comes from anyway, is to learn what it is to be really alive and what it means to really love. So they came up for a 3-day retreat and did some amazingly challenging work, because he was
What did they do?
Well, it's probably more than I could talk about in this segment, but they had a lot of relationship issues that had been kind of twisted for quite a long time, and they saw that.
Oh, so they were they were willing to go there.
They were.
That's
at that
great.
point, I think they were willing to go anywhere, because this was, and very much, we're going to die, or he's going to die here. What needs to be resolved? So they looked at everything. She was pretty weakened because she had been upholding everything, and he was now the sick guy, and that kind of twisted things even more. And so we did some amazing work. I sent him up at one point up to a mountaintop to write down what a man of character would do, because he was getting ready to face the chemo, and so that was for him a masculine way at that point, at that stage, to deal with. And she did some primal screaming, stamping, dancing, just because so much was held inside of her. So that's how extremely different processes are, whatever comes within that moment. But what did occur then was that toward the end of it, I taught them how to do a guided inner look, an inner journey. You could call it a shamanic journey. And they did a guided visualization. And in that, they saw many of the things that had been very messed up in their relationship. And they spontaneously then spoke new vows for whatever period of time they were together in this process of his, cancer, and they gave spontaneous new marital vows based on a new depth of seeing, and I was sort of the witness, sort of the minister witness, sitting there, and it was, we were all at tears because it was just exquisitely beautiful. There was nothing, it was totally from the heart, unrehearsed, fully vulnerable, present, and that had such courage and such strength behind it. Our vulnerability is our greatest strength, and they both met at a level of honesty and vulnerability that they probably had, if ever, certainly not for 20 years, and if ever, because many of us don't ever quite go, and they did. They hit each other right on just absolute vulnerable open-heartedness. And they went home, and I got a call 2 weeks later, and the cancer is gone. So the doctors don't know what to think or say. They have no idea. It's just gone. There's a little bit of scarring on his lung, but that's it. So now they have a new home, and they came up with their kids, and we did a farewell ceremony. We all made masks, and they took their masks with them in their car and drove off to Texas.
Awesome.
So it was really beautiful.
Wow. What is behind the masks? I know you like the mask process. What talk about that?
Well, I like it for a lot of reasons. I mean, largely because I've studied psychology my whole life and spirituality my whole life, and it's an amazing way to look at the different identities we put on. I mean, we all put on identities to protect us at an early age, and it's not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that those identities at midlife and such are really called to be taken down, because what was once our protector becomes really our prison. We become imprisoned in our own, caricatures, our own prisons. So the mask is an amazing tool for seeing. So oftentimes, not every time, but sometimes when it's appropriate for a person, I'll have them do a mask, because literally, everything is ceremony. So when they put the plaster, you're putting wet, warm bandages on your face, it feels pretty good. Just like when you first put on your identity, it feels pretty good to be the TV star. It feels pretty good to be whatever it is, whatever your persona is. It feels pretty good. It's warm. It's like a facial. We put on our little identities. It feels good to be a successful businesswoman or whatever. And then, as the plaster starts to harden, it gets hot, it gets stiff, just like our identities do. So all of a sudden, they're now starting to get, wow, this isn't quite so comfortable in here anymore, It's not quite what it used to be. And pretty soon you can barely breathe, and, you can't really move in there. There's not much latitude. It's stiff, it's hot. So it has great symbolic representation and meaning, and taking it off isn't necessarily easy. It might be a little bit of painful. They might pull a few things out of their hair, and so there's a little bit of pain in taking it off, just as there is in letting go of our identities and falling into the graciousness and the gracefulness of a real life. So it's a great metaphor.
So when you put the mask on, Rhonda, you can't be smiling, right?
You can smile, but then you have to hold the smile, just like guys that smile. You see somebody on the TV show that can't stop smiling. Whatever you put on freezes.
Interesting. Then when you take it off, of course, we'll come up on the screen with it. So like over here, is that the outside of it? So it gets that clear?
Well, in that picture you're looking at, that's actually a ceramic piece being made from it. So that's actually working on your face, which is also interesting, to actually work on your own face and change the expression.
And so what are you doing here?
I'm working on a face. It's a clay piece pressed into a mold.
Is it
so it's a representation.
Is this a real person?
Yeah, it's a real person.
So how do you get this face?
A mask, same thing, a mask, and then press the clay into it, and then you can do any. So I often do things with dream images or things like that with the face, because then you can look back at yourself. I've done them before as a death mask for somebody who's in transition, so that they can really deal with that part of themselves. I did it with a woman who was dying of lung cancer. She was a smoker for years, and she was a psychotherapist, and I made the mask of her, and she made it as her altar, and it was both. It both meant her mortality and her immortality. She was able to use it as a way to see both aspects of herself, and it really helped her through her process. So the mask is amazing.
I love it.
Yeah, it's an amazing process.
And as we're talking, it's amazing. Do you feel like you know yourself?
Myself is there's not really a self so much anymore. It's not really a self so much anymore.
What is it? How would you describe it?
A fluid, engaged aspect of the mystery. It's very abstract, I know, but yeah, and of course I still have my personality, but the personality just kind of comes and goes. It's like, yeah, okay.
But it was like, what was it at one time? How would you have identified yourself at one time?
All the different ways, you know, a statistician, an academic, a smartass.
Because I think that's important.
Now it's more get out of the way. It's more just get out of the way and be. I'm different with you than I would be with somebody else. You know, because it's not that I'm different. It's just the moment's different. The relationship's different. So there isn't a static self. I don't think any of us have static selves. I think that's one of the problems we're having in our culture is we're trying to have a cohesive I, and there isn't a cohesive I. There's a guy who wrote a book way back, probably in the 70s, out of MIT called Society of Mind, and it's like, yeah, we're a society. There's all sorts of Rosemarys in there, you know, and we wonder why we can't come together. Well, it's because this one wants this and that one wants that, and if we had a little more fluidity with that and a little more compassion for that, we're more like a society. We're like a fluid, moving intelligence.
Well, you know, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I'm here with you, and I'm going to ask you something personally,
sure.
and let's see what you would advise me, or what you would say to me. Okay? So I see that I have this great goal of being a loving person, and love means a lot to me. Okay, but put me in a situation where I think somebody is doing something ineffective, and that I see a more effective way, I could become very unpleasant. So, and I would like to think of myself as somebody who could be like the Dalai Lama, that even though somebody is doing something that I think is harmful, that I could remain peaceful. So, you know, we just have a couple minutes. What would you say how would you say that I could be with that, and yet to fulfill that vision I have of myself of being a peaceful person, a kind person, regardless of how people are around me? I'm putting you on the spot, but what would you say?
Well, if I had to say something, first off, I probably wouldn't say something. I would throw questions back at you until you found that answer within yourself. But
like
that would take a little bit of time here today, probably. So I would probably say, what if you were to look inside of yourself and see if you can first find a way to love yourself even when you're not being loving? Because if you can't find that, how can you ever be loving?
Okay.
So what if you were? What would it be like for you to actually love yourself even in the moments when you can't be like the Dalai Lama, but actually go, oh, that's the truth of where I am right now. And what if you were able to start to put not a critical light of consciousness on it, like, gosh, I've got to be, you know, you can't think loving, loving, loving. I'm going to only be loving. I'm going to only be loving.
Okay.
And make yourself loving.
Okay.
You can only face the truth of yourself from lovingness.
Oh, you mean I can face that part of me from a more from a loving space? I
would say that would be a really good place to start.
Okay, well, good, Rhonda. Thank you. So, what I just wanted to ask you this, because I know that you use breath work a lot. How did you get involved with breath work? Because I know you do the circular breath. I, for many years, used the circular breath also.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Where did you become familiar with that?
I've just always done, I don't know.
Well, tell the audience with how they can use their breath.
No, if you grab it as a technique, it won't do a darn thing. So, yes and no, I can. Yes, okay. Put on some beautiful music that you absolutely adore and love. Put it on good and loud. Lie down. And breathe in and out with no stopping. Full breath in, full breath out. As soon as you're in, done with the in, start the out. And don't be attached to whatever comes. Thoughts might come, images might come, visions might come. Just let them come. Don't get seduced by them, but don't deny them. And just keep letting the breath and the music show you your own inner beauty. That's, I mean, that's the best I can do, because otherwise it becomes I can't say breathe 4 breaths in, 5 breaths out.
Can you just, in like a minute, say again what you said, because I think I'm guilty of this. Don't get caught up in the technique. Because when you say that that's why there's religious wars, is because people get caught up in the technique of their religion?
Yeah, and anything that is a technique, a method to get something is not going to get it. It only comes from letting go from that, or observing that, putting the light of consciousness on that, from slipping into something bigger. And so anything that slips you into something bigger, what I often say, if you want to, again, is to slip into your body. Your body is way wiser than your mind, and we think that's counterintuitive, but it is. Slip into the actual physical body, and then simultaneously what I often do is I slip into my physical body, and I also simultaneously expand my consciousness to be aware of this room, this space. And that, it's impossible for the mind to be the master controller when you try to hold those two awarenesses. And that does bring you into a greater openness of being. It brings you present. But anything that one can do to stop the consternation of the mind trying to get it, because it can't.
And you can do that without, I know that's what I used alcohol for.
Yeah,
I use alcohol to stop my mind.
Right.
And that's just such a, what do you call it? A destructive way to do it, that there's more healthy ways to stop your mind.
Also, if you do anything that honors what you're seeing with some symbolic act, that stops the mind, because you've engaged your heart, your being, your soul. There's something else happening. The body's happening. I would, say, do anything to stop the mind.
I love it. Rhonda, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have been talking to Ronda LaRue. I've been coming up with her websites. She has two. Strongly recommend you go to her websites. And she has 2 books out, Remembering Who You Really Are and The Art of Living Your Destiny. Rhonda, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was just loving being with you.
Thank you. Same here.
Thank you. We acknowledge New Spirit Journal as a sponsor of Being in Seattle. New Spirit Journal is a free, locally owned and published newspaper helping readers create abundance in relationships, finances, health, career, and spiritual life.